0227 Club. Transmission 001. Night shift doesn't slow time down. It presses it flat until hours stop feeling separate and instead feel like one long surface you keep moving across without markers, and if you don't check a clock you can lose track of where you are entirely. I work security at the water treatment plant on the north edge of Monkhouse. It's not a place people go unless they have a reason. Low concrete buildings, chain fencing, service roads that lead nowhere in particular, pipes thick enough to walk through if you had to. From the main road it looks closed. From the sea it doesn't exist at all. That's intentional. The plant runs quietly, always has. Water comes in, gets filtered, treated, regulated, and sent back out. Pressure stays where it should. Flow stays predictable. The town depends on it without ever thinking about it, which is how systems like this are supposed to work. My job is to make sure it stays boring. I watch the cameras. I walk the perimeter. I log anything that doesn't line up. Most nights, nothing does. I've been on nights a little over 3 years now. Before that, I worked evenings down at the docks. Too many people, too much shouting, too many moments where several things went wrong at once and everyone acted like that was just part of the job. Security suits me better. One thing at a time. Usually nothing at all. The security office is a single-room prefab bolted onto the side of the main processing building. The desk is fixed to the floor. 6 monitors are mounted on a rack that was never quite level to begin with, and has slowly drifted further out over the years. One window, frosted halfway up. A kettle that takes longer to boil than it should. A chair that leans to the left, no matter how often someone tightens it. Everyone complains about the chair. No one replaces it. The cameras cover the main gate, the rear service road, the intake pipes, the east fence line, the pump floor, and the overflow channel that runs down toward the coast. Camera 4 looks at the overflow. It's always been temperamental, not broken, just hesitant. A faint flicker every now and then, like the image can't quite decide what it's seeing. Maintenance has checked it more than once. They always say the same thing. Signal's clean, wiring solid, nothing to worry about. I started my shift at 10, signed in, took the radio. Dave on days handed over and mentioned the weather. Said the pressure was dropping and the sea would probably kick up later. Told me to keep an eye on the flow readings overnight. I said I would. He left. I locked the door. The first part of the shift passed normally. Pumps steady, readings well within tolerance, cameras quiet. I made coffee, sat down, stood up, sat back down again. Around midnight the wind picked up. You can hear it through the building when it does, a low pressure pushing against the walls. The sea carries further inland when the weather changes. Even here you can hear it if you know what you're listening for. I did my first perimeter walk just after 1. Torch, radio, clipboard. Same route I always take. Gate locked, fence clear, service road empty, intake area fine. Overflow channel looked the same as it always does. Dark water, steady flow, nothing caught where it shouldn't be. I logged it as routine and went back inside. After that, time lost its edges. I checked the monitors, read part of a notice pinned to the wall that I've read more times than I can count, made another coffee I didn't finish. At some point I realized I hadn't checked the clock in a while. It read 2:27. That didn't feel strange at the time. Numbers stick sometimes. You notice them and move on. I stood up to stretch. That's when I noticed the hum from the pumps sounded different. Not louder, not quieter, just flatter, like vibration without tone. I watched the monitors for a minute. Everything looked fine. Camera 4 flickered once, then steadied. I decided to do another walk early. Outside, the wind had a bite to it. Cold, damp, smelling of salt and metal. The clouds were low enough that the sky felt closer than it should. I followed the fence line toward the overflow channel. That's when I noticed the light. There's a sodium lamp mounted on a pole near the channel. Orange glow. Always on. It throws a circle of light over the concrete and the water. It was off. I stopped without meaning to, looked up at it. The bulb was dark. No glow. No flicker. Lights fail. It happens. But that one doesn't usually. Maintenance replaced the whole fitting last winter. New housing, new wiring. They made a point of it. I shined the torch toward the channel. Water flowing normally. No debris. No blockage. I stood there longer than I needed to, listening. The water sounded the same. The wind moved through the scrub along the fence. Somewhere further off, something metal rattled once and then stopped. I turned back toward the building. That's when the water shifted. Not a splash. Not a surge. Just a disturbance upstream, traveling briefly against the flow before smoothing itself out again. I leaned closer and held the torch steady. Nothing followed it. Pressure variation, I told myself. Happens when the pumps adjust. I finished the walk, checked the rest of the perimeter, and went back inside. When I sat down, camera 4 was steady. The light was on. I checked the timestamp. Live feed. I switched to another camera and back again. The light stayed on. I assumed it had come back on while I was outside, even if I hadn't noticed. I made a note in the log. Just the light. No detail. That's when I realized the logbook wasn't where I'd left it. It was open on the desk. I don't leave it open. I close it every time. Habit. I stood there looking at it before touching it. The page was filled. My handwriting. Same pen. Same pressure. Same slant. The entry was time-stamped 2:27. Overflow channel checked. Light intermittent. Flow behavior inconsistent with baseline. I read it twice. It wasn't inaccurate. Those were things I'd noticed. But I hadn't written it. And I wouldn't have phrased it that way. I checked earlier entries. Yesterday, last week. All normal. All mine. Just that one line. I looked up at the clock. 02:27. It hadn't moved. I waited. Counted slowly. Nothing changed. I picked up the pen and added another entry beneath it. Logged the light. Logged the flicker. Dated it properly. The moment I finished writing, the clock ticked forward. Linger die Inertia Baffen. The radio crackled once. Static only. I held it for a moment. Nothing followed. I sat back down and watched the monitors. Camera 4 flickered again. The light went off. Then on. Then off. Each time the feed stayed live. No signal loss. Just the light-changing state without warning. I checked the other cameras. Everything else was steady. Around 2:45, the flow readings dipped slightly, then corrected themselves. Within tolerance, but noticeable. I logged it. At 2:58, the pum-pum flattened again. Same as before. Subtle, but wrong. At 3 o'clock, the wind outside dropped suddenly, and the silence that followed felt heavier than the noise had. At 3:11, camera 4 went black. Not static, not interference, just a dead feed. I checked the connection panel. Everything was lit, no alerts. I switched feeds, cycled the display, came back, still black. I called it in on the radio, no response. Tried again. Nothing. Protocol says to do a physical check when a camera goes down, but I didn't move straight away. I watched the other screens and listened. Outside, something struck the fence. Not hard, not repeated, just one contact. Metal on metal. The cameras showed nothing. I waited another minute, then grabbed the torch and stepped outside. The light by the overflow channel was on again. Steady. No flicker. The channel looked normal. Water flowing. No disturbance. I checked the pole. Wiring intact. No damage. I stood there listening to the water longer than I needed to. The wind had started again, but softer now, like it was holding back. Nothing else happened. I went back inside and logged the camera failure, marked it for maintenance. After that, the shift settled into something quieter but not comfortable. The clock moved normally. The pumps sounded right. The readings stayed steady. Camera 4 stayed black. Sometime close to 5, I noticed the logbook had another entry. This one wasn't time-stamped. Flow stabilized. System holding. Same handwriting. I didn't add anything beneath it. When Dave came in at 6, he said camera 4 had gone down overnight, put in a request, said it happens. I signed out and went home. Later that day, I saw a notice from the Water Authority online. Short update, no detail. Minor irregularities detected in overnight flow data. No service impact. No time listed. I'm back on shift tonight. Camera 4 is still inactive. If the clock stalls again, I'll see it. If it doesn't, then this was just another night in Monkhouse. Most nights are. They pass through without leaving much behind. After the camera feed stabilized, I didn't feel any sense of resolution. The building continued to function, but it felt like it was doing so deliberately, as if effort was being applied somewhere just out of sight to keep things within acceptable limits. I remained seated for a while, hands resting flat on the desk, listening to the pumps cycle and recede, cycle and recede again, the sound no longer fading into the background the way it usually does. Every change registered, every vibration felt distinct. The clock read 3:36. It moved normally now. Second hand steady, no hesitation. I stood and walked the length of the room, checking each monitor in turn even though I already knew what they would show. Gate empty. Road empty. Intake steady. Fence line clear. Pump floor unchanged. Camera 4 showed the overflow channel in its normal state. The sodium light cast its familiar orange circle. The water moved at the expected pace. I stayed with that screen longer than the others. The image didn't flicker. The timestamp advanced normally. Nothing crossed the frame. Still, I watched. At 3:41, the pump tone shifted slightly, then corrected itself. The change was small enough that it wouldn't have registered if I hadn't already been paying attention. I logged it. The pen felt heavier in my hand than usual, as if the act of writing required more pressure than it should have. I kept my handwriting neat and consistent, taking care not to rush. When I finished, I closed the logbook and placed it squarely on the desk. I did not look at it again. Outside, the wind moved in uneven bursts, not strong enough to rattle anything loose, but persistent enough to be noticed. The building responded with small, familiar sounds, a creak here, a low vibration there. At 3:52, the sodium light dimmed again, not fully, just slightly. I leaned closer to the monitor. The water continued to flow. No obstruction, no surge. The readings on the adjacent screen remained unchanged. After several seconds, the light returned to full strength. I noted the time mentally, but did not write it down. By 4 o'clock, the night had settled into a pattern. The pumps flattened briefly, then recovered. The wind rose, then fell. The light dimmed and brightened at irregular intervals. Nothing escalated, nothing resolved. I stayed inside. At 4:07, the timestamp on camera 4 froze again. This time at 4:07 exactly. The image continued to move. The water flowed. The light remained on. I checked the main system clock. It continued normally. I waited. 30 seconds passed, then another 30. The timestamp updated. 0408. No sound accompanied the change. No alert. No radio interference. I did not touch the logbook. I found myself checking the flow readings more often than necessary, watching the numbers refresh and refresh again, each update identical to the last. The consistency should have been reassuring. It wasn't. At 4:19, something changed in the sound of the water. Not the volume, the rhythm. A brief hesitation, like a skipped beat, then a return to normal. I stood and listened from the doorway, trying to determine whether the sound came from inside the building or outside along the channel. I couldn't be sure. I stepped outside again at 4:23. The air felt heavier than earlier in the night. Not colder, just denser. The sky was still dark, but the clouds had thinned enough to let a faint, diffuse light through. The sodium lamp was steady. I walked the length of the channel slowly, shining the torch ahead of me, then back toward the building, then along the fence. The water looked unchanged. No debris, no movement beyond the flow itself. I stopped near the same midpoint as before and listened. The rhythm was there again. Subtle, inconsistent. I checked my watch. 04:26. I waited. After several seconds, the rhythm smoothed out. The water returned to its usual sound. I completed the walk and went back inside. The door closed behind me with the same dull thud it always makes. At the desk, the logbook was exactly where I'd left it. Closed. Unmoved. Camera 4 remained live. I sat and watched until my eyes started to ache. At 4:44, the radio emitted a short burst of static. Longer than before. Not enough to be a call. Enough to be unmistakable. I picked it up and held it near my ear. Nothing followed. I set it down carefully. The clock read 4:45. It continued to move. By 5 o'clock, the building felt tired. That's the only way I can describe it. The pumps cycled with more effort. The vibrations lingered longer after each adjustment. The flow readings never crossed a threshold. At 5:03, the sodium light dimmed one last time, then returned to full strength and stayed there. Camera 4 did not flicker again. I remained seated until the sky began to lighten, that flat gray that comes before actual morning when the world looks unfinished. At 5:38, the pump sound returned to its usual background hum, the kind you stop noticing after a while. At 5:49, the wind dropped completely. The building settled. When the clock reached 6 o'clock, it moved without hesitation. I stood, gathered my things, and waited for the day staff to arrive. Nothing else happened.